Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Shelley Rottenberg from Canada. Lovely to see you, Shelley. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So Shelley's a transracial adoptee, and you're a speaker and you're a poet, and we've done a couple of these. I just think the poems have a wonderful way of evoking an experience.
hmm
And I'd love you to read this poem that you wrote back in 2019 called Self.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you so much. So I'll just jump right in then. Yeah, it's called Self. So it's hard to find yourself when you don't know where to look. When your ancestry is an exclamation mark, but this one's got a hook. So many unanswered questions, there's so much that is unknown, and there's not a map to give direction to help guide you home. Being adopted means that I sometimes feel caught in between. The way I was raised shapes who I am, but unfortunately, that can't be seen. People see a Chinese girl and make assumptions based on race, but there's so much more to my story that you can't tell from my face. I used to feel lost in my own skin because I did not know where I belonged. I thought I had to pick a side of myself, but looking back, I was so wrong. I had a slight identity crisis when I started at university, and this was because it was my first exposure to real diversity. But I couldn't relate in many ways to the people that looked just like me because I wasn't Asian enough as much as I wanted to be. I don't neatly fit into just one box. Instead, I'm carving my own way. I'm a bit of this and a bit of that, and now I realize that's okay. I'm on a journey of self-discovery and I don't quite know where I'm going. But all that matters is to keep moving and continue to keep on growing. I may not find all of the puzzle pieces that I am searching for, but my sense of self is strong now. It's much more solid in my core. Thank you.
Wow, it's the precision and the succinctness which you bring. I've got 3 pages of notes that I scribbled down. The conversation we had last when you
Mhm.
and there you've captured it. So we were on the phone, well, on the Zoom for an hour last time, right? All the stuff
Mhm.
I scribbled down, but there you've captured this, this in betweenness, so precisely.
Mhm.
I love your precision. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps. I'm holding up my
Oh.
arm to the camera on Zoom, right? And
Mhm.
all of the I've got this goosebumps, and all of the arms, my arms, the head and back of my arms are standing up. Um, so wow. I'm just gonna. By the way, listeners, there's going to be a link, obviously, in the show notes to this,
Okay.
to the page on Shelley's website where the poem's listed. Um, in the middle, you say, I used to feel lost in my own skin because I didn't know where I belong. I thought
Mhm.
I had to pick a side for myself, but looking back, I was so wrong. And this kind of goes into what you were talking about when we met last
Mhm.
time. These the power of these aha moments, right?
Yes.
When we realize that we're wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been huge for me. But can you tell us why that's been so powerful to you, or just give us a little bit more insight into that?
Yeah, I definitely for a long time when I was trying to kind of find, my place in the world, where do I belong? Do I need to tap more into trying to be Asian or, I have my mom, she's Jewish. I felt like I needed to be more of that as well. And I kept having this feeling of I'm not enough of either. And then I think, along that self-discovery journey of kind of leaning into the adoptee identity is when I realized after meeting other people who had similar experiences as me that was okay, that there wasn't anything wrong, that it's not that I'm not Asian enough or not Jewish enough or anything else, but that it's fine to kind of be this more hybrid, complex, unique mix. And that's what makes me unique. And that's what, forms who I am as a person. And that, it's okay to be this way. And also that might change over the years. And there's sometimes that I might feel a bit more Asian or a bit more Jewish, but it's not an either or. It's like everything, all of those parts, equally make up, how I choose to identify now. And it did help to meet other adoptees to realize that struggle of you feel caught in between, that is something that many other people had experienced throughout their lifetime. And then finally finding a community where I felt like, okay, people really understand me and I can resonate with them. And then, after so long of feeling like, okay, not many others have experienced this. Like although I knew adoptees when I was younger, I was still a kid at the time and I hadn't processed a lot of this stuff. And to me, I was just adopted. It was just something that happened in my past, but then kind of reclaiming and having that identity of around, no, this is something that still affects me today and will affect me for the rest of my life. And then leaning into that and kind of just being able to feel a bit more proud and, instead of kind of having to explain why my last name doesn't match what you'd think when people meet me and see my face, it felt almost kind of like, oh, it's something that makes me different and I don't want to be different. But now the more that I speak about my story and share about my experiences, I realize that that's something to be celebrated. It does not something that I have to feel like I have to just explain to make sense of why I am the way I am and why I might not match, a typical family dynamic or what you'd think of when you hear the name Shelley Rottenberg. And so definitely just finding more comfort and security in that. And it's still a journey for sure. Like there are some days where I might still feel like, oh, I'm not enough of this, or I wish that it was maybe easier to connect with my culture, or maybe I wish I knew I had already learned Mandarin in the past. It would make it easier. But I do think that, I've come a long way in just that self-acceptance and just continuing to kind of work on that, even now.
Yeah. So would you used a few words there. So you talked about struggle, and then you talked about pride and celebration, comfort, security, self-acceptance. How would you sum it up there, the change?
Yeah, I think it's just that I've been able to, it helps sharing my story and hearing about other people's experiences, realizing I'm not alone, and then not feeling, maybe like there's something, wrong with me or something that's bad that I need to fix. That, that my identity is the way it is, and that's okay. And just kind of feeling like now I'm putting myself in more spaces where there's opportunities to talk and share about my story. Even just like creating my own website was like, to me, like a big step of kind of making myself searchable so that I can connect with others if I do maybe speak at something and they want to connect with me, because I think that's been very rewarding every time I share, to have people say like, wow, I really liked what you said, I can relate, because that's what helped give me the courage and to start sharing my story when I saw other adoptees being more vocal. And then I thought, oh wow, like, yeah, I'm not the only one. So I've gotten more involved in like adoptee organizations, and I do a lot of volunteering with hosting meetups locally to create more of that in-person space for adoptees, because I found the adoptee community as an adult online during the pandemic, when a lot of events that normally would be in person now was more accessible to me, even if they weren't like physically close. And then it's nice having that online community that I've been a part of and have really found like, maybe almost healing in, and then being able to kind of transfer that to help create like those in-person spaces for even more connection. And sometimes it's adoptee related, or sometimes it's just kind of that social thing, but we all still know that we have that common thread that connects us. So I think just through all those actions of taking like more leadership roles and, get to me, it's like I want to give back to like a community that I feel has helped me a lot personally. And then in that, maybe it will help other people as well. So that's been something that I've just really leaned into the adoptee stuff, as opposed to before, it's not something I really gave a lot of thought to. It wasn't anything that I spent time, like doing or thinking about or having conversations. And so I think all of those things, it's kind of in a way been slow, but then it kind of seemed to happen all at once. Like once I started getting a little bit involved, just the ball kept rolling, and I realized that it really brings me a lot of fulfillment and I am very passionate about it. So just, sometimes doors have opened up, and, opportunities I didn't even look for, I've come across. And so it's been really great to have that connection piece for me, to connect with other people and then for them to hear my story.
Yeah, you're passing it on, aren't you? Giving back. And I wouldn't have found you without that. So
Mhm.
that's one of those things. And so has it been quite, has the journey been quite kind of intuitive, and just one step at a time, or has it been more of a master plan, or has it just been organic? How's it been?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't planned because, like I said, I found it during the pandemic, and that was at a time when I had graduated. It took me quite a few months to find employment. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And that's when I started getting more involved in some adoptee organizations. So there's China's Children International, and then in Canada, there's Asian Adoptees of Canada. And so I just, found opportunities. I thought, oh, maybe it'd be cool to volunteer, but it's not like I had ever planned to do as much as I'm doing now. And I also just, I couldn't, if I were to go back and say, oh, this is like everything that you've done and you've been doing, I think that would have been a surprise to my past
Yeah,
self. Because I think I started it from a very like personal, almost like selfish place, where once I found like that community, I was like, oh, this is like helping me a lot. Like it was very much like I want to connect with these people and hear more about their stories. And it's something that kind of just opened up my world a little bit, hearing other people articulate their experiences in ways that I couldn't form the words to even think about. But now that I have maybe better language and terminology, and I've learned more from watching documentaries or reading books, and like people recommending resources or saying, hey, there's this webinar you might be interested in. So it kind of all just trickled into itself. And it was something that I had the time to do and that I wanted to do for myself. And then eventually I kind of realized, well, it's not just about me. Like it is now that aspect of me wanting to give back, because I feel like it has helped me a lot. Um, so yeah, so some of it, I guess, in like smaller steps have been planned, but definitely kind of the whole looking back at the past few years since 2020, or even a little bit before that, it definitely, some of the things were more spontaneous and stuff kind of just happened. One thing maybe led to another.
yeah. The reason I'm asking the question is that I saw something on social the other week about somebody, an adoptee who was kind of ready to go with doing some social media stuff, and just didn't know what to do. Like, how do I start? And I think I put something on like, well, there's two answers to that question, right? Number one, when he was afraid. There was a fear of being ignored, right?
Hmm.
And we kind of like we all know that I put posts up and nothing happens. But when our passion is bigger than our fear, then we tend to take action. So that was one
Hmm.
answer to the question, and the other answer to the question was just start, because
Yeah.
you've talked about the ball rolling, and some of it being planned, but a lot of it's been more intuitive and organic. And
Hmm.
we don't know the next step till we know the next step. So that's why I wanted to just ask you about that, in case there's anybody listening, right?
Hmm.
Um, Leaders go first, and then we, help other people go, help people become more visible, and the snowball rolls down the hill and gathers force.
Yeah, exactly. And there definitely was some fear too for me in the beginning, because, my story has been my story my whole life. So it doesn't always seem that interesting. And so kind of I've had similar thoughts where it's like, well, do people really care? Is this something that people would listen to? Or, like engagement in terms of social media? Like my goal isn't to really be an influencer or anything. Like I do have an Instagram account that's for my adoptee stuff, just to kind of have it all in one place that's a bit more, easily digestible than the website. But my goal is not to like pump out content and then educate a bunch of people and always post about what's going on in my life. But I've realized, it could be whatever I want to make it. I don't have to put rules on myself of I need to post this often, or I need to always be, really loud and participating when National Adoption Awareness Month comes up, because I'll have ideas and sometimes, I don't get around maybe to actually doing everything that I've thought of, but then just kind of, being more gentle with myself and being
Yeah,
like, I don't have to do it all.
yeah. But your work seems to be far more in terms of it's the community aspect that lights your fire rather than the content, churning out content. You know, like I had another look at your website before we spoke today, and listeners, like Shelley's got a lot on. She's kind of listed all the things that she's been involved in now, and there's a lot going on. But it is that community vibe is a lot stronger than this kind of lonely, well, not lonely, but you know, like an Instagram influencer sitting at home on the phone. It's not about that. It's about community. It's about the community for you.
Yeah, it really is, because I love that connection with people. And like even in my life, I do research for my work, and I'm drawn towards qualitative research. I really like interviewing and hearing people's stories. And so that's just something that, you know, is across my life in all different aspects, that I like that community connection, kind of, you know, being able to interact with other people, and kind of almost storytelling and things like that is something that I'm really enjoy.
Brilliant. So I'm going to take you back to the poem again now.
Sure.
So you say I had a slight identity crisis when I started at university, and this was because it was my first exposure to real diversity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a predominantly white, like town, you know, neighborhood area. So for elementary and high school, you know, there wasn't a lot of Asians or even, you know, other people of color. And I think, you know, growing up, I've heard a lot of transracial adoptees say this too, that I felt very white on the inside. And I knew obviously that my ethnicity is Chinese, but what it meant to be Asian, I really have no idea. Even today, I'm still kind of bad at defining like what that means to me to be an Asian person. So I think I just didn't really understand race very well, and you know, my own personal racial identity. And so I just kind of grew up like that. And then when I went to university, then I remember the very first week, there's this event where they have all of the tables for the different clubs and organizations you can join. And there was like hundreds of like booths of people trying to get you to join their club. And there was a lot of Asian clubs, you know, Asian interest clubs, or, you know, kind of different intersections of that with maybe other hobbies or something. And so at first, I was kind of like excited, like I've never had this opportunity to connect with other Asians, and there's clubs available. But then as I was looking at the booths, and, you know, they're telling me what their club is about and how they bond over kind of, you know, shared experiences of maybe like being raised in an immigrant family, or some of the hobbies that they like to do, or just you all understand the cultural sense. And I slowly just realized like it wasn't anything they did, but I felt internally like, oh, I don't fit in. Like I won't be able to connect on all the things that you connect on. And, you know, just because of how I was raised, and I kind of excluded myself from joining those things, because I just automatically felt like I'm not going to belong here. And so instead, for my university, I ended up joining a Jewish sorority, because I thought I'll get in touch with like the Jewish roots and stuff. Like, you know, my mom is Jewish, and maybe I'll lean into that and learn more. And although I've made close friends and overall is a very good experience, there's still a lot of times that I didn't feel like I fit in there, because everybody would say like, oh, like they wouldn't know right away that I'm Jewish, because there's often like there wasn't as many people of color in like the Jewish community, at least where I went. And there was just times where there was things that again I haven't experienced growing up that all of my friends did. You know, maybe they went on birthright, or they went to Jewish day school, they're a counselor at a Jewish camp, or they spoke Hebrew, they kept kosher. And there's so many experiences too, like culturally, maybe religiously, that I didn't identify with. So it was kind of like, oh, I don't fit in with the Asians, so I'll go in this direction. And then there's still those moments where sometimes I'd come back from an event and I would just feel like something was missing. And I was like, oh, maybe if I did this more, or if I try harder, like then I'll feel like I fit in. So there's still a moment of, you know, it's like I'm trying to fit myself like a round peg into like a square hole or something. And so even though it was great in many ways, there was still this like, oh, you know, I'm trying down this path and it's not like 100% clicking for me. Like I don't feel like this is a place where I truly belong. There's still ways that I can't connect with these people on ways that they can connect with each other. And so I think that's where I was struggling, you know, throughout my university years, of just really trying to find like that place. And I think that's kind of what university is for. You know, you're like discovering yourself and your interests and meeting new people. But there was, yeah, identity was like a huge thing that kind of popped up. And at first, as it was happening, I didn't really realize it, but kind of just at the edge, once I was through it, and then reflecting back is when I realized, oh, it was like adoptee related, kind of. It's not something that I thought during it, but then realizing, like, my identity as an adoptee did have a huge role in that struggle of, like, I don't know who I am or where I belong or where I fit in. And again, that's what prompted is there something wrong with me? Do I need to try harder to fit in? Because it wasn't until I found the adoptee community after, like, graduating, and it was online. So that was a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're describing it. Obviously, it's a few years ago now, and you're describing it in a quite a detached way. Was what was it like at the time? Can you remember? Was it like a heartache, or was it just was it an emotional thing, or was it more
Yes.
logical thing? Yeah, it was.
It
It
was
was.
definitely emotional. Yeah, there was one time I remember I came home and I, like, I'm not always the best at kind of in the moment processing my emotions, but usually I feel like, my body still knows how I'm feeling, even if, like, my mind can't articulate and really figure out what I'm feeling. And so I do remember coming back from an event, and it was like a Chabad, like Shabbat dinner kind of thing. And I'm not that religious in terms of Judaism. I'm in, like, a little bit culturally, but so it was a kind of more like cultural slash religious event. And I just I didn't really feel like I could be myself, so I was very shy and quiet, and I kind of reserved, and I didn't connect with a lot of people. And then afterwards it just felt very much like, why did I even go to this event? Like, it didn't add anything, and people probably don't even remember I was there, and no one talked to me, and I was too quiet to say anything, and I could just feel in my body that I was not comfortable, I was not myself. I just felt like I was, very small in the moment, just trying to do something that was not working. And I came home and I was talking to my mom about it. I ended up crying, and she was saying, oh, maybe you should, see, like, a counselor at school to talk through some of this stuff. Again, at that point, I hadn't even mentioned adoption. Like, I thought, I just, oh, maybe I have social anxiety, maybe I need to fix myself in that way so I can talk more and interact and be more extroverted and stuff like that. And so I was still in the mindset of, like, oh, there's something that I need to do that's I'm not doing now that would fix this issue. So I wasn't even thinking then about, it's my identity, and it's me surrounding myself with maybe people and an environment that just isn't matching, like, aligned with, like, my who I am and how
Yeah,
I authentically would best show up if I was around people who could just relate to me better. So it's nothing wrong with the event and the people and the community that I was trying to be a part of. It just wasn't, like, the best match, and I was trying to make it work when I don't think it was,
yeah,
like, meant to be. So it was definitely emotional, and then maybe a bit logical, because I was trying to take action and steps to try to figure out, oh, how do I fix this? But it was definitely, like, I felt kind of down about myself, and I didn't know what to do. But I am close with my mom, and so she's, like, a big part of my support system. And it was hard for her to see me struggling and being, like, visibly, like, upset and everything. Um, and so yeah, so she, she's always supported me, and especially as I've kind of leaned into the adoptee stuff, she's been very supportive. So that's been really great. My support system, even my friends beforehand, I didn't talk about being an adoptee, I didn't talk about adoption a lot, but some of my friends who, I know now through the journey of me kind of being more of an advocate, they have been very supportive as well. And I feel like in me opening up, they feel like they've been able to get closer to me because they know my full story and my feelings and experiences. Um, and it's like made us closer, which is great.
yeah. Yeah, you're incredibly articulate the way you put this across. This is,
Oh, thank you.
um, yesterday when I interviewed a therapist, and we realised after we finished the recording, I realised that I've been having to ask her a little more questions because she's used to asking questions, right? So
Yeah.
there's a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, I had a little bit of that at university, kind of not fitting in. So a lot of the kids were from they were either I was from a private day school. The kids at
Mm.
university were from a boarding school, like a Harry Potter type place, or
Okay.
day school, right? And I didn't feel I fitted in, but mine wasn't quite as emotional as yours, right?
Mm.
But anyway, back to the poem. I want to ask you
Hmm.
a little bit. A little bit more. So the last
Yeah,
line,
sure.
I may not find all of the puzzle pieces that I'm searching for, but my sense of self is stronger now. It's more solid in my core. So
Hmm.
the first line then, I may not find all of the puzzle pieces that I am searching for. So this is about acceptance, is it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of about, what do I feel like I need to feel kind of more whole and secure in my identity? And so, the adoptee community, as I've mentioned, has been a big kind of, filling, puzzle piece of, wow, I didn't know I needed this, but clearly I did because it's helped and changed my life in a lot of positive ways. And I think sometimes there's these there's so much unknown when it comes to at least international, especially from being adopted from China during the one-child policy, the kind of where do I come from? Who am I? Like my ancestry, medical information, when was I born? Like my real age, my real name. So there's a lot of things that, I might never get answers to in terms of knowing where I come from and more of the details around my origin story and my birth and what happened the first 8 months of my life before I was adopted by my mom. That's kind of a mystery. There is some information in the documents, but I've heard that sometimes it's not always accurate, so you don't know for sure. So I personally, I haven't done a lot of active searching, but I've done kind of smaller ways of birth parent searching. And I do one day want to go back to China. I've been back to China because my younger sister's adopted. So when I was like 4 or 5, I went with my mom to adopt my younger sister, who's from a different city and province. But I would love to go back to the specific city where I'm from. And then in that, I probably would be interested in doing maybe some more active on the ground searching or to connect or maybe hire somebody to help me because again, I don't know the language. And I think, that could open a whole nother can of worms because it's a very emotional process I've heard of, you have all these expectations and all these things you've been wondering your whole life. And then you might never find your birth family, or you might find them, but it might not be what you imagined. And so I think that kind of adds a little bit into the identity piece of, who do I look like? What characteristics, both like physical traits or personality, what part of my genetics makes me who I am versus, the nurture versus nature argument. Like I do believe that a lot of who I am today is shaped by, my upbringing and like how my mom has raised me and where I live, location. And so all of that stuff plays a very big role. But there is still sometimes those like question mark and there's those gaps and things that I'm very curious about. And I know some adoptees personally aren't, like they don't care to think about the past or think about anything before their adoption because they're just focused on their life now. But there is like that aspect of, I would love to look into that more and find birth family, but whether it's even possible, it's a very slim chances. I heard one person, adoptee, say that instead of like it's a needle in the haystack, it's like a needle in the ocean trying to find when you don't have a lot of accurate information to go off of because I don't know my name. Like the orphanage gave me my name and then they estimated my birth date. And so some of that is kind of referring to those puzzle pieces that I might not find, and then trying to kind of be okay with that as well, in terms of like, do I really need to know that information? Like, again, I've heard some adoptees talk about, the thing that they're looking for is themselves. And then once you find yourself, then that kind of answers all of the questions that you might need and just to feel more secure in who you are and the community that you build for yourself. And sometimes there's like, the chosen family, like not only my adoptive family, but the adoptee community and the specific friends in that community I've made that have supported me. Yeah, so I'm like clearly still on the journey, I feel like it never ends. It is really lifelong. um mhm.
Yeah. I was wondering how this would have been different if there'd been a booth at college which said Asian adoptees on it.
Yeah, I would have loved that. I have heard that there's other adoptees who've started clubs. There's culture camps that they were sent to when they were kids, and they've had, again, I was connected to adoptees as a child, but it was just kind of for play dates and hanging out. And, I guess I could see others who were represented and who had similar experiences, but we never talked about it. So I think that during those years where I was struggling more with my identity, it would have been helpful maybe at that time to have found others where I could talk to them because that probably would have helped me maybe process things a little sooner and really figure out, and it would have maybe shortened that like process of me having kind of that identity crisis and trying to seek and find resources for myself, it probably just would have made it a little easier. So I feel like I'm trying to do that now, and it's great because so many adoptees are doing that, creating like and being the change we want to see in the world. And there's a little girl who's also a transracial adoptee that I'm a mentor to. Her parents found me through another podcast, and they found my website, and so I meet with her once a month. And she's very young, but sometimes we have very basic conversations about adoption, and she knows a little bit about my story. And it's just very cool to think that I'm like maybe helping her, especially as she grows older, if she has questions or things like that, just that she'll hopefully know that she's not alone, and that it's not something that you should be like embarrassed about or anything. And I think that's something that would have been nice if I had that, like somebody to look up to, or just somebody else who would be there and maybe to kind of sometimes facilitate conversations, because I didn't know to ask certain questions. But I think if some of it was explained to me, or you know um, stuff was started a bit sooner, of me starting to think about my story and my identity, as opposed to like into adulthood, I'm having all these questions now at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that sounds brilliant. How old is the little girl that you're mentoring?
Oh, she's 5. She's
She's
so cute.
5.
Yeah.
Wow,
And I
wow.
think it's great that her parents,
Yeah,
again, there's just transracial adoption, that they are taking those steps to proactively, try to set that up for her, like a role model, like a racial mirror, a mentor. So I just think it's great that they
yeah,
they even found me, and that they're trying to get this started like while she's young. So yeah, I really admire their efforts.
yeah, yeah. That's absolutely fantastic. And do you do it on Zoom then, or is this face to face?
We do it in person
Yeah,
because they had listened to someone else's podcast, and when I said that I was Canadian, they didn't know exactly where in Canada, but we realized we're not that far away. So we do meet once a month in person. And a lot of the events are just, since she's young, we'll go like little events and stuff. We hang out for like half a day or something, but then in there, there might be conversations here and there. Like I'll mention, because I talk to her parents are always there. I'll mention to them, oh, like I read a poem, one of my adoption poems at an open mic, and then she wanted to hear one of the poems, or I had the poem published in the textbook, so I read her the poem, and she said, oh, like, can we come listen to you next time you read your poem? It's like she's really, I think, taken interest, and so that's nice to see. And yeah, I never try to like force conversation, but just
oh,
kind of if it comes up naturally, and the fact that she's kind of interested in it is very cool.
yeah, yeah. I love the one-to-one thing. I love the proactivity of the parents. I have come across the odd. Some agencies do that mentoring, uh,
Mm,
but yeah, largely I've heard it in group formats rather than one to
mm,
one. So it's whatever works. Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
So the next one, it says the last line is, but my
Yes.
sense of self is stronger now. It's more solid in my core. So um, this was obviously back in 2019 that you wrote that.
Hmm.
How has it strengthened again since then? Do you feel like you yeah, I guess you must have done, because that was obviously before COVID and everything, and you've done so much more work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely has strengthened since then. And again, it's never like linear, and that it's just improved so much and everything's great now kind of thing. But I do think the more I've got involved, the more I've been telling my story, I've been connecting with other adoptees, have taken more of leadership positions. I think all of that has helped tremendously. And I do feel more like if people question, because there's sometimes situations where outside of the adoptee community, you'll interact with people, sometimes it's curiosity, maybe mixed with ignorance, and you get questions that can be a bit like invasive, or sometimes they're well intentioned. And I've had this growing up since I was a kid, and when I was younger, I just ended up kind of word vomiting my whole life story. I'd say, oh, I was adopted from China, and then they asked another question, and then I end up just telling them everything personal about me. And I think, I'm trying now after COVID, of there's more now in-person interactions, not everything's online, and you do interact with people more now, and sometimes those questions might come up, and just realizing that I don't have to do that if I don't want to. I've become very comfortable with sharing my story, but doesn't mean that it's still not personal, or it's not a private thing. And so I like that, realizing that I have more control over who I tell and when I tell and how I tell my story. And some people maybe don't need to hear all those details. And the way that I answer those questions, just kind of, yeah, I think I'm getting a little bit better at navigating those. Um, and realizing that, you know, I am proud to be an adoptee. I am proud of my identity and things like that, but it's not something that I have to feel like, oh, I need to explain it to everybody when they question who I am or my identity or, you know, my name or why don't you speak this or, you know, how come you don't know about this? You know, so I think that's something that again I'm still figuring out, but I think there's been a little bit of an aha moment of me not having to really go back to being like, okay, well, it started, you know, when I was 8 months old in China and orphan. Like I don't have to give all of that information because sometimes in the past, you know, I'd have a weird feeling after. I would feel like, oh, I've kind of like really shared a lot, overshared with people who are strangers. Sometimes I'll never see them again. And you know, it's me putting in a lot of emotional labor just because they're curious or they have never met someone who's adopted. And it's like, does that burden really have to be placed on me all the time? I do have that desire to educate and inform people because then I think, you know, the more you know, and then if they interact with other adoptees and maybe they won't ask these questions, but then trying to find that balance between it doesn't always have to be my job to educate them and teach them. And I can choose to keep some things private and answer more simply and just say, oh, you know what, that's actually kind of personal. If you have more time at a later date, we can go into that. But it depends, you know, the time and the place. So I think just knowing that that's an option now as opposed to before, I think I would just always say, oh, like I'm adopted. And I would say it very matter of factly because it wasn't something that felt very personal. It was just like a story that I've been told so much and I'm used to telling so much that it almost kind of didn't have like as much meaning as it does now at this point in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you catch yourself these days? You think, oh, I'm oversharing. I can stop it at that. How do you what
Yeah, I think sometimes I choose to maybe not like correct people because you know they won't assume I'm
ah,
adopted. They'll assume that I was raised in an Asian household and that you know maybe my parents are strict and that there's a lot of assumptions and stereotypes that people might place on me, which you know makes sense because in society you kind of have to do that to a certain extent. And you know in previous times I would feel like I need to correct people and say, oh, actually no, like that's not the case for me, or you know I'm adopted, and then I kind of without sometimes people even asking I would then be explaining before they question me. And so now sometimes it's like, you know, if there's a situation and again about time and place, I like kind of tell myself of like you don't have to get into your whole life story here and now. It's something that can kind of come up more organically or, you know, on a one-on-one conversation as opposed to if it's a group thing or if I'm at some sort of event. And again, thinking about who the person is and their relationship to me if it's somebody that you know is somebody that I'll probably see multiple times that I'll slowly get to know, then it makes sense to kind of tell them. And people who I might not see again, it's just kind of up to me how I feel in the moment of if I want to get into that and if they seem nice and friendly and well intentioned or you know some people aren't. So trying to know when it's not worth maybe getting into something where then I feel like I have to defend myself because some people almost are like against things. You know, I've heard other stories where adoptees will be told, no, you don't look like you're Chinese. You look like you're this or that. Are you sure? And, you know, knowing when I need to maybe conserve my energy and I don't need to get into kind of almost like I'm proving my identity to other people because I don't have to do that. And again, it's something that I have to remind myself of. But you know, the more it happens and the more I practice, the better I'll get at it, hopefully.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And perhaps I really this is perhaps a tricky one, but what do you mean by your sense of self is stronger now? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it has to do with all the different intersections of my identity. You know, the adoptee piece has been kind of like part of that aha moment that ties everything together. But then realizing that my other identities were previously, I thought it looked a certain way. Like, you know, to be Asian, you would check off all these boxes on a list and then you're considered Asian enough. Or to be Jewish, you have to have done this and you know this information, you practice these customs and traditions and just realizing that you know those other identities are like more fluid than people maybe sometimes realize, you know, like especially being like Chinese and again Jewish people, you know, there's not as many people of color who are Jewish. And then just realizing, and then I have through some of the adoptee groups found other Chinese people, Asian people, people of color who are Jewish. And again, that's not a huge part of my identity because culturally and religiously, I don't strongly identify with that. But there is still a connection there because of my family and my friends and, you know, how I was raised a little bit. But realizing that there's more room than I originally thought, that some of these labels and boxes are not as rigid or binary, and that, you know, me as an adoptee, I'm still 100% Asian, 100% Chinese. I can choose to identify as little or as much as I want with like Judaism and that as an identity in terms of culture. And just kind of, I think my sense of self, my view of it, like from myself, has expanded, and I've allowed for more things to exist all at once instead of it being like I have to be this or I have to be this and it has to look exactly this way. Because I think that's the problem with me originally not feeling like I was meeting those, you know, requirements that no one ever told me. But just in
No,
society, you know, you see other people and you realize, wait, you know, the way that I am as an Asian doesn't match the way that this person is, and you know how they act or how they are as an Asian person. And so thinking that that meant that I wasn't Asian enough because I started comparing myself to other people. And then realizing now that, you know, there's no rules. Like it doesn't have to be so cut and dry, black and white, that my sense of self is, you know, a mixture of things. And but it doesn't mean one takes away from the other. It doesn't mean that if I'm more of this, that I have to be less of that. So I think it's gotten more nuanced over time as I've learned more about myself and just also about, you know, race and different issues. And again, just seeing other people speak up and talk, that has helped me a lot as well.
yeah. If there was a metaphor for how you see yourself, what would that be?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not the best with metaphors, but I think something that is just kind of, you know, started off small and enclosed, and then it's slowly been kind of growing over time and evolving. Um, and doesn't mean that before, you know, when I didn't know as much and maybe my sense of self wasn't as secure, it doesn't mean that that was a bad thing, you know, that was just where I was at that point in my life. But just something that kind of, I guess, a metaphor that would represent kind of this growth process that I've gone through and this change and kind of being a bit like leaning into the diversity and difference and uniqueness of who I am. And yeah, I don't know. I'm in growth, I think, of like plants and I love nature. So maybe something, you know, along those lines.
Yeah. Well, because you know there are. I mean, there's another podcast called "Pull by the Roots," right? So people,
Oh.
yeah. So people feel that you know. I saw a book today, a guest who's coming on the show, and you know something like "Survival Without Roots," and that was
Mm,
actually a domestic white adoptee in the UK,
mhm.
right? Not a transracial adoptee. Um, but you know, there's this idea of you know the roots pulled by the roots. The root you've lost the roots. You've lost your
Yeah.
grounding. You've lost your
Yes.
grounding. So it's interesting that you know you're giving a plant analogy. Um,
Hmm.
I was thinking about like because you're into research, right? So that was as I
Yeah.
was thinking, asking the question. I was thinking maybe uh, I came up with like a pie chart,
Mm,
pie chart.
mhm.
But then you said, well, it's more nuanced than that. So I thought maybe that's a little bit too unnuanced, whatever the opposite of nuanced is. It's a little too
Yeah.
straightforward, you know. But yeah, the growth, the growth, the plant thing strikes me as a great one. And also, I
Hmm.
think you know, I see like other people, uh, like you know, like the bees, like they take the pollen or whatever from your plant, and like
Mm,
you're helping you're giving back. So
mm, mm,
you know leaders give back, and you'll help, and even this little girl who's 5, right? You're mentoring this girl who's 5, so that yours is like, yours not just one plant, it's a whole ecosystem. You're tapping into different ecosystems, and you're helping them grow as well.
Yeah, I like that as well because in my undergrad, I did environmental science and human geography a bit. So the environmental science piece, although I'm not doing that now, and because I love nature, I feel like that's a great way to kind of take the metaphor and just expanded it to, like you said, to kind of represent those connections. And I think that's a huge part for sure, that those interconnections, and it's not just me working in the silo in a bubble or anything. Like, I have come to where I am
Yeah,
because of other people. And then now what I do is also like interacts and helps
yeah,
hopefully other people too. And so it's really is about community, which is just an ongoing theme, I guess, for this
yeah.
episode.
And that's it. And the interconnected thing. That's another reason why the pie chart doesn't work, isn't it? Because it's a little bit too isolated. The pie chart is, you're all the different slices of the pie. There's no community, and going back to the thing is that, in terms of your sense of self, the metaphor that you give is a plan. So you are rooted, whereas other adoptees, perhaps earlier on their journey, are feeling unrooted, but you've got a stronger sense of self. So it's like your roots are spreading wider, and that's gonna, what do they say? Like that you're gonna bend with the wind because you've got stronger roots.
Yeah, you're kind of flexible and you can adapt to kind of a changing environment. And yeah, I've heard that too, where like, if there's a hurricane, the trees that are too like strong and sturdy, they might snap.
Yeah,
But the ones that are a little bit maybe skinnier and they kind of are able to bend, they won't end up snapping because they can go
yeah,
with the wind and they're a bit more resilient, which, hopefully that's what I'm doing for myself, is kind of
yeah,
helping myself build some of that resiliency within myself and through this community. And it's just been so great meeting so many other adoptees. And I think at first it started with, oh, I can relate to other transracial Chinese adoptees. But then, like, I mean, obviously we're different types of adoptees, and just realizing that there's so much in common just amongst all adoptees, whether it's domestic or international or transracial or same race. And there really is stuff that still connects all of us. And so realizing that my community is even bigger than I originally thought. And at first I thought, they have to kind of perfectly align with the experiences that I've had. Even beyond the adoption community, sometimes I've spoken at things and someone who's mixed race says, oh, I really related to your story. Or someone who's just, maybe an Asian person who grew up also in a predominantly white area, but they're not adopted. And they've said, I can relate to what you've shared. And just that kind of, oh, like I'm really not alone. Like some of these identity issues, like whether it's adoption that's the cause of it or something else, it's like other people understand what I'm going through, and it's kind of like this shared thing that we're all on together.
Yeah. It's like, I was thinking about difference there as you're expressing it, and I was thinking what we can. So on one level, it's about the different. I guess it's how profound we're going to go and how deep we're going to go. So we all look different, we kind of think different, but we all we feel the same. It's feelings are a lot more we share our feelings with others more than we share our thoughts, perhaps.
Yeah. And then also, kind of the flip side to that is that even within the adopted community, I have been exposed to a lot of differences, and realizing that, like, we're not a monolith, and there's some adoptees that have very different perspectives on adoption or on other issues that maybe connect to adoption or not. And just realizing that, okay, I think in the beginning, I did think that, oh, I'm adopted. And so other people who are adopted have felt the same way, feel the same way as me, have had similar experiences. And then I was exposed to people who have had very different experiences. And that's made me reflect on me and kind of how I fit into this larger picture with all these other people. And that even if I maybe don't agree or have different experiences than other adoptees, they might have different goals or movements or agendas or organizations that they're really into, or they might not be into any of that stuff. And again, just not even be thinking about, oh, being adopted in any way. And just realizing that even within this community where we all have this stuff that's in common, there's still so much diversity even in that, which is nice in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm conscious of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm also conscious that sounded a bit dismissive then, didn't it? Yeah, for sure. I didn't mean it like that.
That's okay.
You know that, right?
Yeah.
After an hour, right? And an hour the other week, last month, you know that.
Yeah, it's okay. We could keep talking forever.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share that I've not asked you about?
I don't think so. I think that the way that you've structured this with the poem and then kind of picking out different lines, and that has just kind of led to a lot of great conversations. And I feel like I've talked a lot about, growing up and then that kind of identity crisis moment and then where I'm at now. And so
Yeah,
that's allowed me to really share like a full picture of my story and what I've experienced. And so I really appreciate you having this podcast and reaching out and giving me the space to share my story. And it's been like really great connecting with you because again I love connecting with other
you do.
adoptees and just people in general.
Yeah,
So just thank you so much.
yeah, that's brilliant. I've loved it. I've loved it too. I love that, like a little tiny little takeaway. Not correcting people.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, yeah, because like, have you heard about this in? This is a bit of an aside, right? Improv. People do improv.
Yeah. I'm not good at that.
Me neither. No. One of the things is you've got to go along with it. You've got to carry you've got to carry the improv along. You can't
Yeah.
block people. If you block people, then that's kind of the end of the conversation. And and if we interrupt people, then it's kind of, it jars, doesn't it? It jars slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just getting more confident and sometimes like even just in my personal life trying to be a bit more assertive, which doesn't mean you have to be aggressive. I'm very nice, but I think sometimes that could be to a fault because I'm thinking of other people ahead of myself. And so just trying to remember that, I don't have to do that all the time. Like I can put me first sometimes. And if it's something that I think is gonna, not be the best for me, then I don't have to give or answer or explain or do all these things, for other people if it's at a disservice to myself. And just trying to remember, and again, finding that balance because, there's no one way, one perfect rule book or guidebook on how to navigate life and things. And just it's going to look different for each person. But that's just, on my own journey of figuring out what works best for me.
Yeah. Top stuff. Thanks again, Shelley, and thank you, listeners. Thanks for listening. We'll speak to you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.